This is Brian Sawyer from Bigfoots of Michigan, and you're listening to Let's Find Out with Diego.
Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us the final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia. It's another episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Thank you for taking this journey with me. On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest is a seasoned investigator in the field of paranormal research, with nearly 2 decades dedicated to exploring the supernatural. She has shared her unique perspectives on ghosts, angels, demons, and shadow men, weaving theories and insights into her writings. She also touches on topics such as near-death experiences, after-death communications, and the intriguing phenomenon of man-made ghosts. As the founder and director of the Delaware Paranormal Research Group, she leads her team with determination, showcasing the evidence they have gathered over the years to affirm the existence of hauntings. All this plus more. Please welcome to Let's Find Out, author, founder, and director of the Delaware Paranormal Research Group, Robin Strom Mackey. Robin, my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out. It's a pleasure having you on this afternoon.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure being on. Nice to be on with someone from West Virginia. That's a beautiful state, by the way. So,
Thank you. It's very beautiful and, very haunted as well. It's a lot of history.
We just last year actually went to the region where they had the Mothman sightings. I'm tripping on my words, but yeah, I was very excited to get over there.
Oh, yeah, that's a heck of a drive all the way from where you're at to down there. But no, all these drives and all these explorations are very well worth it because, where you and I are in a similar journey to find evidence, to find the truth, and to find some answers to questions we have in our own lives and other people as well. And speaking of that, what I like to begin with, you've been doing this now for close to 20 years now, correct?
20 years, yeah. Getting there.
That is amazing. So the question I'll ask is, what brought you on this journey? Because normally it's one of two things. You've either had your very own paranormal experiences growing up, or someone that has, or was it both?
Actually, I had absolutely no paranormal experiences when I was a child. And I had none when I was an adult until I hit my 30s. So, and we had moved into an old Victorian home that appeared to be haunted by a child ghost. So that was my first experience. And actually, things started happening the first night we moved in, it was fascinating. So we were moving in, we were cleaning everything. Our furniture hadn't arrived. So I had a 2-year-old at the time. So I put my 2-year-old down in a bedroom on the floor, in a bunch of sheets and blankets. And then my husband and I continued working late into the night, and then we bedded down in the living room, basically. So we're sound asleep, and something wakes me up in the middle of the night, and I open my eyes and I see a small child looking in at me, or down at me, like they were kneeling and looking down at my face. And it was dark, of course, so I assume it's my son. So the child gets up and he skips on down the hallway, and I don't hear him anymore. And I'm like, honey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And keep in mind, he's 2 years old. So when you can't hear what a 2-year-old is doing, it's a bad sign. So
Yes.
yeah, so I get up and I finally go down the hallway to the bedroom. And of course, he's sound asleep in his bed. And you know, the paranormal was furthest from my mind until that moment. And then I realized that, oh my gosh, I think I just saw a ghost. So, and then throughout the time that we lived in that house, of course, we continued to have experiences. Electronic toys in particular would go off all the time in my son's room, and I would go up there, and I just assumed it was, the batteries going bad, so I'd take the batteries out. There was one sports car toy that my son had. That thing would go off all the time. And again, I wasn't into the paranormal at that time, so I just assumed that, that it was malfunctioning. So I'd take the batteries out and, restart it and that kind of thing. And then one morning in particular, I woke up, and he was a little older at that time, but he has always been an early morning kid. So it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I got to get up and teach in an hour or so. So I hear him playing out in the hall, and I'm like, honey, it is far too early for you to be playing. I don't want to get up. It's only 5 o'clock in the morning. And I keep hearing these sounds of playing. And finally, I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to get up and shag him back to bed so I can get some sleep. So I go out into the hallway, and of course, there's no child playing in the hallway. And once again, I go into his room, and he's sound asleep in his bed. I'm like, it's just this house. So that's what really got me started. At the time, I was starting a new teaching career, and I had absolutely no time. If you ever taught, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's just an all-encompassing type of job, but that, of course, lit my interest. And then when we moved down here, and I caught my first Ghost Hunters episode, and I'm like, well, my gosh, if two plumbers can do it, I can do it. So,
Yeah.
and I was just hooked after that. So,
No, that's amazing. It's because you mentioned that prior to moving into this home, you never had any sort of experience like that.
yeah.
And what was your opinion of that subject matter before that? Did you give it much
Oh,
thought?
I've always been fascinated by ghost stories. I remember my best friend and I, when we were little girls, we would stay up all night and tell each other ghost stories until we were so afraid to go to sleep. We had to go into her parents' room. But for me, because I had never had any experiences, that's what it was. It was just stories. So it wasn't until I moved into that house that I realized that maybe that's not all just stories. So, yeah.
And how long did you stay in that house? And what information did you find out about the history? And maybe did anybody tell you anything about prior hauntings in that home?
No, as I said, I was teaching at the college level at that time, so I had no time. But it was an old home. It was built before the Civil War. It had actually been the home of the funeral director. Now, they didn't actually have the funeral parlor there, but the owners of the funeral parlor owned that home. That was at least one of the residents in the home. It appeared to be a small child. Again, I didn't have time to research, what small children might have passed away, but obviously it was built about 1854, 1856. It's very possible that, a child was lost at some point or another. So,
Sure. And then once you moved out of that place, did you warn the people afterwards that what possibly can go there? Or you just say, hey, good luck to you, give them the keys and ran?
we had moved out of the state when they closed on the house. And so I actually never met the people that replaced me. So it's a 4-year college town. And so it tends to be a place that gets bought by college professors because it's a very large house, very stately house. So and if you know anything about tenure track positions, there's a lot of turnover. So the house was bought by, I believe, a college professor, and then a couple of years later, it was sold, and I believe it was to another college professor, and I think it's like on its third third professor at this point, so it tends to turn over quite often.
Oh, okay. So not because of the activity, mostly because basically once they're done with their term, they move on. Somebody else comes in there and lives and does the
Right,
same thing.
right. Yeah,
Okay.
when you take a tenure track position, you have 4 years to prove yourself, and they're very, very competitive, and so most people don't make the cut. So that's the cutthroat business of 4-year degree or 4-year universities that no one really knows about. So
No, no, I'm sure it's definitely very involved and very stressful at the same time.
oh yes, very.
So going on, because you mentioned that once you moved out of there into another location, you came upon the show of that paranormal group. Did you shortly after that begin your research into the paranormal investigations, or did you decide to write?
I started with a group that was local here because I had no idea how to investigate the paranormal except for watching it on TV. And I also I come from a scholarly background. I as you can see behind me, I just read everything I could get my fingers on. So yeah, I read a lot. I started investigating with the local group. I started writing, I started blogging first. So I would research a topic of interest to myself, and then I would write an article about it. That kind of, spurred me on. So, and I've always wanted to be a writer. So it was a way for me to research and write and actually get my feet wet. So,
And that you have because you're now working on your third one. But let me bring up,
yeah,
I believe this is the first book, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'll feel terrible if I'm incorrect, but I'm going to take the chance. So, Anatomy of a Ghost, correct?
correct. Yes.
Perfect. Um, there's a mention in that book, which is I'm really looking forward to asking this question about man-made ghosts. With that being said, are we talking about hoaxes, or are we talking about some sort of unknown technology?
Well, I bring up the Philip experiments, so which is something that pretty much everyone is familiar with, where it was actually a psychological experiment where they had a number of people, just lay people, and they would bring them in and they were trying to prove the existence of psychokinesis is actually what the experiment was to do. It was not to create a ghost. I think that's misperceived so often, but so they were doing this in daylight hours, and they were bringing these people in and they were having them think on this topic, and they weren't having any success. And then they decided that they were going to, number one, create a persona. So they came up with this persona of Philip. He was supposed to be an aristocrat. They created his castle and what time he had existed. They created a wife for him, and then they did something completely different. They instead of doing it during daylight hours, they created a seance type of setting where they turned the lights off and they all sat around a table, and it was the whole mystique of the seance. And lo and behold, it didn't take too long, and they started to have results with that. So the table was tipping, there were knocks on the walls, and this went on for quite some time. Now, the reason I bring up the point too about the psychokinesis aspect is that while they had made a persona for Philip, he never went off script. So he never said anything or reacted in any way that went off script from the bio that they had written for him. So was he a real persona? No, he appears to be something that they created. As I said, this went on for quite a while. They were having great success with that. And then one day, one of the members on the team said something along the lines of, you're just a made up ghost, don't you? And all of a sudden, all the activities ceased, and it never started up again. It was like once they pulled the veil off, it stopped. just blinked out of existence. So that is one topic that I bring up. And then I also bring up, can I remember her name off the top of my head? Alexandrine. Anyway, the one female explorer that went into Tibet, and she found out about a creature called a tulpa. Now, when I researched that, I had never heard of anything related to a tulpa in my life, and now it seems to be it seems to be all the rage these days. But basically, what she did is she found out about the idea of a tulpa and how to create a tulpa. And so she set about creating this tulpa, it was a monk or a friar that she was creating. And she seemed to succeed. She started seeing a friar or a monk, but unlike the Philip experiment, it seemed to be an entity that she had created that took on a life of its own. So the longer it was in existence, it started to change. I should also say that other people besides just her started seeing the monk. So it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. They would, someone would come to her tent and go in the tent, and they actually see a monk. And then I believe his facial features started to change, and he started to kind of have a malice about his face. And she decided that he was, basically taking on a life that she had not intended for him. And so she basically uncreated him. So, and she did that, of course, with, through a thought process. I'm sure she did some sort of ritualistic procedures, but so it seems that you can create your own entities by, concerted thought. So, and they speculate that, again, with the psychokinesis, right? So they speculate that if a group of people has a fear, for example, werewolves, right? Or another example that's perfect for today is the Thin Man. It started out as a video game, right? But it seemed to talk to the psyche of young people. And it didn't take too long where we started having Thin Man sightings, because it was, it was something that really got into people's psyche and really was frightening. And they speculated that, the thought processes of so many people actually created the Thin Man, basically by sheer thought, by sheer consciousness. So it appears that we can, as a group or a culture, create out of thin air the very monsters that we fear the most. So, which is frightening.
And that's quite amazing what you just said. So let me throw this out there to where perhaps a ghost, or I'll use generic terms like ghost, demons, or whatever your flavor would be. Let's say there's a group of people or one person that wants something like this to be alive. Are these demons or spirits taking on that persona because they know they can live through that and they gain maybe some sort of strength through the energy of these people trying to create something?
Well, I never thought of it that way. They always assumed that they were creating something from nothing, and then it was taking on a life of its own. I think we should consider that the human brain and consciousness is far more powerful than we imagine. And I think we're far more able to create, someone came up with a skyscraper, right? And it didn't just appear, of course, but someone came up with that idea and they made it into a reality. Who's to say that we can't do the same? We can't perceive something or imagine something, and through the very sheer power of our minds actually create it. So I don't think it's a demon taking on a persona just because it's it's envisioned. I think it's an actual creation with the human mind, but that's my personal opinion.
No, it sounds. Something came to my mind as you were talking about that. I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to bring something to the table on this too.
Okay.
When I was growing up, I was an only child up until the age of 15. And I didn't really go out that much. So there's times I could take a handful of Matchbox car, a couple Transformers and G.I. Joes and create a whole universe and be there for hours. And what people used to say were imaginary friends, but they were kind of real to me. Up until I really didn't need that in my life anymore, becoming an adult, and I could say I think that it's possible to actually create some sort of being or beings or actual universe around you that you perceive or can be real.
Right. And that would also go a long way to explain the multitude of different, some people see werewolves, some people see sea monsters, some people see mermaids, some people see, it's just so much variety, so many different accounts, and none of them seem to, coincide. So the sheer volume of stories, it would go a long way towards explaining that.
Yes, and as you said, the human brain is a very powerful thing, and I think that very few people understand the things it's capable of doing. Because I don't know the percentage, and I'm sure you'll know better than I do, is that we use a very small percentage of our brain and our power, where sometimes we might tap into something unknowingly, and things do come to life. And then now going from Anatomy of a Ghost and moving to the second book on the hunt for the haunted. In between there, is that when you started the? Were you still with the old group, or did you start Delaware Paranormal Research Group at that point?
Oh, I was only with the original group for about a year. They weren't a terribly professional, group, and there was a lot of infighting, and I was only with them for about a year, and then I'm like, I'm out of here. I can't handle this anymore. Well, this I don't know what it is about the paranormal, but the egos are they're just nuts. So so I left the group and I continued writing. I hadn't even started anatomy at that time. And then I'm like, I'm going to find it difficult to continue to write about the paranormal if I'm not having any interaction with the paranormal. So I kind of came to that conclusion on my own. So I looked around for another group. I didn't see anything that particularly interested me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and do it myself. So that's when I started the group. So, so anatomy is only 3 years old. So it was quite some time. I continued to blog and research. And it was a long time before I actually sat down and wrote the first book. So, and then the second book came out at just a year or so later. Actually, it was like a boom, boom type of thing. So the third one's taken its time though. I've been working on that one for 3 years now. So COVID kind of ate that one ate that one alive for a while, but we're getting there.
Yeah, COVID did a number on all of us. No matter
Yeah.
what industry you were in, it was a real
Yeah, I was just kind of in a bad place for 3 years. It just, yeah. I didn't want to.
No,
I don't
I'm
know what
there.
happened to the time. Even it was just like, I'm just going to be depressed for 3 years, and
it seemed like it was so long ago, but it really wasn't. In those 3
not
years,
long enough. Yeah.
they drug so terribly.
Oh,
But
yeah.
out of that, some amazing things did happen. Some people, they started writing books. They started becoming podcasters. Started doing their own research at home because you can't really leave the house.
Right.
But
Right.
in going into your second book, it goes over a lot of the stories about your investigations and the experiences when you went to these locations and exploring these cases, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you saw during that time?
Well, the investigations are over a number of years, actually. So I write about Fort Delaware. We did Fort Delaware 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago. And then I wrote about my long neck investigation, which was one crazy investigation. That was like 5 years ago now. Did I do Earl? I don't remember if I did Earlville or not. It's been a while since I wrote that, like 3 or 4 years ago now. So, but yeah, so it spans a number of years, and I tried to pick the investigations that were, that produced more evidence. So obviously we do a lot of investigation. We do a lot of residentials, but they don't always, they don't always give you a great deal of, but then sometimes they do. Hartley House is in there. I know we did the Hartley House 3 times. So it was like, we'd do the Hartley House, we'd wait a year, we'd go back in and do the Hartley House, we'd wait a year, we'd go back in to do the Hartley House. So I got to the point with the owners of the Hartley Houses, they'd hand me the keys, and they would take the dogs, the cats, the children, and themselves away for the weekend. That's how much trust they had in me, that, they just hand over the keys to the house, and away I went. So, and that one was always, it always produced just a plethora of EVPs. So a female EVP, you go out on an investigation, you'll get 1 or 2 if you're lucky. I would get things like 10 EVPs on a one-night investigation at the Hartley House. So she was just a chatterbug. So yeah, that was amazing.
So how do you go about choosing these locations?
Actually, the owners come to me.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, even then, well, we did contact the Fort Delaware. We had to, there was a whole insurance thing we had to do. We had to take out liability insurance, just so if we fell down the stone steps, they wouldn't get sued, that type of thing. But for the residences, they tend to contact me and, say, hey, I've got something going on in this house, and I'd really like it if you came on out. So I think, I'm trying to remember. I would probably have. There was one in Maryland that, oh gosh, I felt so sorry for. Single mom. She's living in a 1-bedroom house, basically, that had possibly been slave quarters at one time. So she had a boyfriend. She and her boyfriend are in bed one night sleeping, and her son is downstairs on the couch with the dog sleeping. And at one point, she and her boyfriend both hear the door to the house open and like slam open. And then they both hear footsteps, doom, 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 across the living room floor where her son is asleep, right? Terrifying, right? Terrifying. So, and then they start to hear the footsteps, boom, 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 coming up the steps towards them. So the boyfriend gets a bat or whatever he has weapon-wise to hands, because they honestly think it's a human being, right? So the footsteps get all the way up to the top of the stairs, and the boyfriend comes out swinging, and there's absolutely no one there. And so they go downstairs, and both the son and the dog had peed themselves. They were,
oh my word.
So yeah, she said it was the most terrifying thing that she'd ever experienced. So that was quite an investigation. We had up in the bedroom where she had an area where it was blocked off, and then there was like an attic space in the closet. And she said she would be in her bedroom and she would hear movements and things going on in that attic space. So we set up a camera in the attic, and we also set up a camera, obviously, in the bedroom. And so at one point we go outside. The entire team is out. We go out the door and we're outside. And what you hear on the camera, you never see any movement, but what you hear on the camera is this slide slam slide slam, like someone's taking the door and just bashing it. So, and it happened 2 or 3 times, and then later in the night, again, we all left the home for for a while to take a break, and the same thing happened again. Slide slam, slide slam. It was just wow. It was unbelievable. So that was quite
No.
an investigation.
Now, during that investigation and afterwards, were there any resolution to this person's issue with the home?
Well, we don't because we try to be scientific about it. So I can give people suggestions, but we don't actually do any cleansing. We don't send things into light. We don't do any of that hocus pocus stuff. We investigate, we reveal, and if you want further, we give you suggestions. But I don't even think she asked for any suggestions. I think for her, it was knowing that there was something there. She wasn't mad, and that I probably hear that in 90% of the cases. It's, I'm so glad you came out, and I thought I was going crazy. So so very often that's enough to make them more comfortable. So, and even though I had the slide slam sounding, nothing was, no one was actually hurt. It was just a frightening sound. So
No, and I think it's fair to say that once you validate your findings and you show them the evidence, I know I would feel a lot better saying, yeah, maybe I'm not imagining this. So it would be up to the individual how they want to deal with it after your team leaves, correct?
yes. So, and I can give them suggestions on how to smudge or sage, a property, and different techniques for that. But we don't actually do that.
And with the numerous investigations you've done, and eventually you or your team members have to go back home, has any of this ever followed you back?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Luckily, it's not stayed very long, but yeah, I have had things follow me back, and early on too, because when I first started this journey, I was really honestly, I was an agnostic. I didn't believe in higher powers. I didn't believe in. I wanted to prove, the reason I went into the paranormal research was I wanted to prove to myself, whether or not there was anything to this. So in the early years, I didn't do a lot to protect myself. I wouldn't wear a cross. We didn't do prayers because, that kind of went against my whole, went against the grain. And so, I would have things follow me home. And then I contacted a paranormal researcher that I really really enjoyed his work, and I told him about the situation. He's like, "You're going in there without any protection?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you realize how stupid that is?" I'm starting to. So, yeah, I had talk about a wild ride. So I went, and it wasn't even an investigation. It was a walkthrough of a property. So we hadn't even been there to investigate at the time. So I come home, and a couple of nights later, my son, when he was small, he had a sugar glider, which is like a little marsupial critter that lives in Australia, or comes from Australia. So he had a little sugar glider, and that particular night we had taken the sugar glider out, and the three of us, my husband, my son, and I, had sat in his bed and let the sugar glider run around. And then eventually we put the sugar glider back in its cage. We tucked my son into bed, and we went to bed ourselves. So I'm sound asleep one night, and I wake up, or I thought I woke up. The only false awakening I've ever experienced in my entire life. But in a false awakening, if you don't know, is where you think you are awake, but you're actually still asleep. So I thought I woke up, and I see a figure at the foot of my bed that I believe is my husband. And he reaches out and he releases his hand like that, and the sugar glider jumps off his hand off onto the bed. And I'm in the bed patting the sheets trying to catch the sugar glider because I don't want him to run away. And finally I get my hands over him and I'm sure I've caught the sugar glider. And then something inside me says, there's no sugar glider there. And sure enough, I released my hands and there's no sugar glider there. So then my husband said, what are you doing? And I'm like, what do you think I'm doing? I'm trying to catch the sugar glider and I'm talking to the figure at the foot of my bed. And then I realized he's talking to me from the side of the bed. He was asleep the whole time I was having this experience with the made up sugar glider. So then I see the figure, and we both see the figure because we're both awake at this point. We see the figure turn around, leave the room, go down the hall towards the bathroom light turned on. And so I'm like, what is going on? So my husband goes down towards the bathroom, and of course there's no one in the bathroom. We go check on my son. He's sound asleep in his bed like he always is. But it was just the most bizarre thing. And then I had an old hag experience that very same night where I wake up and it feels like something's on my chest. Like, I've never had an old hag experience in my life. I've never had a false awakening experience in my life. And I had 2 of these weird anomalies in one night. And at that point, I'm starting to get a little annoyed. I'm like, get off, because I'm not even afraid anymore. I'm just annoyed. I'm like, you're killing my nice rest. Go away. So yeah, that was one bizarre night. It was just really bizarre night. So
That's a lot of action for one night.
You're telling me. And a lot of imaginary sugar gliders. So yeah, that was a bizarre night. So yeah, I started taking some protection on investigations, and I don't think I've had any situations since then. So
well, that's great, because
yeah,
even though you've been at this now for 2 decades and I've been at this for a while now, it's still terrifying to have that kind of experience, especially when it wakes you up and it's a shadow person, something like that. It's,
yeah,
no matter how many times it happens, it's still very alerting, to say the least.
oh yeah, it's
Go.
bizarre.
Oh, absolutely. And go, because you talk about false awakenings, which brings me to the next subject that you're also covered with, near-death experiences and after-death communications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a topic that I'm very fascinated with, because I believe it goes a long way towards explaining ghosts and the whole paranormal phenomena. So but after death communications are basically communications that occur after death. It's not a haunting. It's mom or dad or some loved one coming back, basically most of the time, to say, hey, I'm fine, don't worry about me. And it can happen in a number of ways. It can come during a dream, but this is not going to be your typical dream. This is going to be a very, very vivid dream. You're going to wake up the next day and you're going to recall every word that was said to you in this dream. So, and I actually had one of those after my father passed. I had what they call a lucid dream, where he came back in my dream, and he had been a television repairman for about 25 years, back when television first started being the thing. So, and he'd also worked on hi-fi stereo systems. They used to call them hi-fi. That's how long ago this was. But so he, in the dream, he's talking about his latest hi-fi system that he had built. And then, so, it was very realistic to something he would have actually talked about. And we had a whole conversation. And then he told me that he loved me. And then, the very next day I woke up and I'm like, I could have written down the entire conversation, because it was just that vivid. So they can come in dreams. They can come in signs. I don't tend to like signs because they're just so wishy-washy, but you know what I mean? But as I say, we try to be scientific. So you know, your sister passed away and she loved ladybugs, and then in your house you see a ladybug and you assume that, you know, she's coming back to say, if it makes you feel better, that's great. I just, as I say, from a research standpoint, it's kind of weak, but you can actually see the person, and I've spoken with people that have actually seen departed people. In my mother's case, she was in bed one night and she heard my father call from the other room, and she said, without even thinking about it, she patted the bed and she said, "Come to bed, hon." And then she realized that he couldn't possibly have been there. But she heard his voice clear as a bell. So you can see him, you can hear him. Sometimes they come in dreams, sometimes they come in signs. Telephone calls. God, I'd love to have one of those where, you know, someone deceased actually calls you on the phone or texts you on your phone. I'm still waiting for one of those. That would be great. So that's a fascinating topic as well. So that's after death communications. And then near-death experiences are where you have passed away and, you know, during a medical emergency, and then somehow or another they managed to bring you back from, you know, from death basically. So, and the fascinating thing about near-death experiences is they, depending on the depth of the experience that you had, they are very step by step. The first thing that happens is you see yourself in the hospital bed from somewhere in the ceiling. Then the next thing is that you're sucked out of the room. Then you're in this tunnel, and the tunnel stories vary, but basically you're in a big dark tunnel and you can see a light at the very end and you're just screaming through this tunnel. And then if it's a deeper NDE, then you might end up in a gorgeous garden or this beautiful landscape or a beautiful city. In some cases you'll meet someone. It depends on your predisposition, but some people have said that they've met Jesus. There was one woman that said she was an Elvis Presley fan. And she said during her near-death experience, she actually met up with Elvis. So I find it hard to believe that Elvis is actually Jesus, but so and very often you'll meet someone there. In some cases you'll see loved ones. You know, you run into departed loved ones, and then basically you get sucked out because it's not your time, and then you end up back in your body. So, but it's the fascinating thing again is that they all go in these rigid step by step by step. You know, this happens and that happens and that happens and that happens, which is, I mean, the universality of it is what makes it so fascinating. If everyone was having some sort of crazy, you know, LSD trip type of dream, it'd be one thing, but the fact that so many of them report the same things in the same steps, just, I mean, it just causes you to validate the experiences.
And there's definitely has to be something to that, because I'm one of the opinion that I think we're all going to be surprised as once we end this life and moving on to whatever it's next, it may not even be what we think it's going to be.
All right. Yeah.
With moving on, because I know that you're currently working on that third book, and I don't want to spoil it, but something very interesting came upon. I was reading your bio. There's gonna be a part in there where you'll be writing about St. Joseph's Industrial School. Where is that located? What can you tell us about it without spoiling it, of course?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've got permission from the school. Well, from the school. I started it 3 years ago, but to write it, so it's not a problem. It is located in a very rural community in Delaware. called Clayton, Delaware, and it is now a military ROTC high school. But it operated, what's so fascinating about it is it operated for 86 years as a Catholic boarding school. So it was a boarding school for African American boys. It was started very soon after the end of the Civil War, in order to, give African American boys some type of education, teach them a trade, so that they, would have something to, to go out and earn a living with. So, and it was for boys that were middle school aged. And as I say, it operated for 86 years. So obviously it saw a lot of change, but the gentleman, and I actually was able to hunt down some of the gentlemen that had attended the school while it was still a school, because it didn't shut down until I think 1972, if memory serves. So I managed to find some of the young, well, they're older gentlemen now, but some of the people that actually attended the school before it closed, and they. You always wonder too, with a Catholic school, because you hear horror stories. And so I was wondering, what was it like? What kinds of things did you guys do? Were the priests and the brothers good to you? And to a person, the men that I talked to just loved it. It was just a wonderful, wonderful place. So, but as I say, it shut down. In the early 70s, and then the Catholic Church, it was right around the civil rights movement period, and the Catholic Church decided that it was probably not politically correct to segregate African American boys from all the other ones, so they shut their doors for political reasons. And then it just the whole property just stood empty for 1970. It was the 90s before it was bought up. So it was pretty much just vacant that entire time. So, which is fascinating. And I talked to, in the late 90s, it was bought up by a charter school that operates in Delaware as well. And they came in, and the gentleman that I spoke with was one of the first people on the board to renovate the old buildings. And he said, you unlocked the buildings and you walked in, and it was like someone just left one day, turned the lock, and didn't come back for 20 years, because there would be dishes on the table, there would be clothes in the closet, classrooms were still set up, the chalk was still on the board, the papers were still on the desk. It was just like it just shut one day, and nothing changed in 20, 70, 90, 20 some years. So weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Vacant buildings always interest me as well, but it kind of goes hand in hand. But so almost immediately, as soon as Providence Creek moved into the property, they started to notice really weird things. So they were having an assembly there one night. In the gym. The gym is original to the school, by the way, so it's a really, really old gym. And when St. Joseph's was there, they operated, everything basically was housed in one building. So they would have the dormitory wings on either side of the gym. And then I think they had on another wing, they had the classrooms. So basically the boys lived in the building, went to class in the building, played in the gym in the same building. So the dormitory portion of that building was closed off and locked, but there was a window that you could see down the hall into the dormitory. So they're doing a choir concert or some type of concert on the stage in the gymnasium. Suddenly, all the power goes out. You've got a room full of people, right? All of a sudden the power goes out. The singer is realizing that the PA system has failed, stop singing. And then Chuck, the gentleman I spoke with, starts to hear the sounds of a vacuum and other people around him start to hear that same sound. They're like, who's vacuuming? So they go over to the wing, the hallway, that's the dormitory wing, C wing, and they look through the window, and down all the way at the end of the hall and dormitory, they see a gentleman in like coveralls and a industrial style vacuum cleaner vacuuming the room. And I'm like, how is that possible? Number one, it's locked. Number two, there's no electricity in this hallway at this time. So, and then the PA system goes back on, and everyone kind of filters back into the gymnasium. Chuck goes and gets a key because he wants to know what in the heck is going on, right? So he unlocks the door and he goes down the hallway to the dormitory. And of course, there's no gentleman in overalls. There's no vacuum cleaner. There's no one there because, the entire wing is deserted. So, and that was right off the bat when they were getting ready to renovate. Then they also reported construction workers at another building, because there's several buildings on the property. But construction workers, when they were working on Morel, would see a priest with a Bible. And they would come to Chuck and they would say, hey, who's that priest with the Bible that we always see walking around? And Chuck is like, I assure you, there is no priest on this campus walking around with a Bible. But the guy was so realistic looking that they had no idea that what they were seeing wasn't real. So you got to love this property.
No, I mean, it's after so many people, multiple witnesses seeing these things, and the experiences could be very interesting, because you're going to be talking about that in your third book. Now, before we go, and I know that I would love to talk more about the book, but I know that you're going to save it until it's released. Do you have a projected time frame when it will be out?
I was hoping it would be out by October, but it's close to being done. I have to have it formatted, and then I have to get it to a printer, and then I got to figure out how to get it up on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and then we should be set. So
excellent.
I a couple wins. Yeah.
I would love to have you back once it's released, and we're going to dig more into that book. And then for the listeners of Let's Find Out that would like to know more about your books and Delaware Paranormal Research Group, where can they go find out?
A couple of different ways. We have a Facebook page, although Facebook is not my favorite, but we do have a Facebook page. We have a website at Delaware Paranormal Research Group.com. You can also type in DelawareParanormal.org. Either URL will work. We also have a YouTube channel under Delaware Paranormal Research Group, where you can see a lot of what the team has caught over the years, and including the First State St. Joseph's footage. We ended up doing 2 investigations there, and so there's 2 videos that have the evidence that we collected, and some of the stuff that we collected was really, really spectacular. So also you'll see our Fort Delaware investigation results there. Earlville, which I was just telling you about with the door slamming, that's up there. Hartley House, all 3 times, it's up there. So if you're interested in seeing what the group collected over the years, much of it is available there. So
awesome. I'm for sure going to get into watching those videos as soon as we're done here with this interview.
Okay.
And as I said earlier, I would love to have you back on next year. We'll talk about the third book.
Back. Okay.
And, perfect. Thank you, my friend.
You're welcome. It's been a joy.
This has been another excellent episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Please check us out on all our social media pages, as well as on YouTube and Rumble. Like, share, and subscribe. Also, Let's Find Out is on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Catch the show on Saturdays at 2 a.m. For more information, please visit KGRADB.com. That's KGRADB.com. Together, we will get one step closer to finding out. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, my friends.
Let's find out with Diego, the power of Diego Mania.
All content for Let's Find Out is property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.